we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me this Wednesday, June 5th, and we're going to be spending some time talking about a lot of different topics. In just a minute, we'll be talking, of course, with our good friend, Representative Van Taylor, who's on with us almost every week, and we'll get a perspective from him on what's happening on Capitol Hill. And the first article we've posted, we've entitled it, "The Bipartisan Van Taylor." I mean, just the fact that you have to write an article about somebody being bipartisan tells you a lot about what's happening in Washington, D.C. Jake McEntire will be with us in the next hour. He is an actor, writer, and the producer of the film Run the Race. We'll be talking about that. Kristen Eastlick will be with us, and before the end of the third hour, we'll be talking with our good friend Gary Bauer about the economy, about Clarence Thomas and some of the things he's written, the criticism, pushback on that, and much, much more. So we've got lots to cover here. But as we do so often on this program, we go to our good friend Representative Van Taylor, representing the 3rd Congressional District. And Van Taylor, it's always great to have you on the program with us.
Kerby, great to be back on the program with you.
Okay, what about this? Dallas Morning News writes a whole article, I mean, at least Matthew Adams does, about you being bipartisan. And it starts out by saying he is obviously a conservative Republican, but you wouldn't know it because he's working the other side of the aisle. Now, anybody who's listened to this program knows that you've always tried to be bipartisan, but the fact that they thought this was worth a very lengthy news article says a lot about Washington, D.C., doesn't it?
You know, that is, I couldn't have said it any better myself. In the Texas, Senate, last legislative session, I was ranked the most conservative member of the Texas Senate by the Rice study. But look, I passed 81 bills. Everyone had bipartisan support. I worked to, find common sense solutions that everybody could agree on to try to, address important issues of the day, whether it's protecting victims of domestic violence, improving military voting, trying to reduce red tape, trying to lower taxes, trying to protect children from child molesters, trying to end forced child marriages. Over and over and over again, there are things that we all agree on that everybody could vote for and that you could feel good about and go home and say, look, I made a difference. I improved people's lives. I am still the same conservative in Congress that I was in the Texas legislature. That guy is still here. Hasn't changed. But the fact that Van Taylor talks to Democrats is front page news is really shocking, and I think that the genesis of the story is that the Dallas Morning News reporter, to his credit, is up in the House gallery and he's observing members of Congress, and he notices that one of the 10 members of Congress that he covers, right? Because the Dallas Morning News has about 10, DFW has about 10 members of Congress. One of them is going over and talking to Democrats a lot. And that is so remarkable, it should be on the front page. It deserves a whole article talking about how, Van Taylor talks to Democrats. And I just think that really gives you an idea about how broken it is. How broken is it? It's so broken that the guy that goes and talks to Democrats gets on the front page of the paper.
Yes.
And I'm still the same conservative I've always been. There's nothing has changed.
Well, and again, I think the point he made is that the two tribes mostly stick to their own kind. So while I will give you all sorts of credit, and it doesn't surprise me in the least that you would go over on the Democrat side, I don't know how many Democrats come over on the Republican side, or even how many of your fellow Republicans tend to go over there and spend time trying to develop some relationships. And as you said, that does say a lot more about the institution right now of Congress than it does about Van Taylor. Taylor, because I can remember, since I'm the old guy around the table, a time when that wasn't quite as unusual as it seems to be now.
No, I completely agree with what you just said. That's, it just shows you how broken it is, and that, hey, you are walking into a very broken congressional system where, I mean, literally they don't, trade phone numbers. They don't talk to each other. They don't, and I'm not saying that you've got to, spend every waking moment, with Democrats, but at the same time, you need to make a concerted effort to build relationships and understand where there are things that you agree on, things where there are that you can work on together to improve. And that's important. I mean, you want to listen to the other side. You want to listen to what they have to say. And they have legitimate points and concern. And I think that the other thing I'll say is it's so important in being a legislator is you have to respect the Americans, or, as a state legislator, the Texans that they represent or the Americans they represent. I mean, every single member of Congress represents 750,000 Americans. And those Americans deserve to be heard through their elected representative, and it's important to respect them. And just like and you see that how I do things back home, right? I mean, I have 100% meeting policy, right? I've met with every constituent that's ever asked to meet with me. I think we're up to over 200 meetings so far in Congress. I've had 13 coffees with your congressman as I go across the district and listen to what people have to say. But just listening is such an important thing, and it really is how I'm conducting myself, and I do it. I listen to my colleagues and I listen to my district. And I think that, that's, if you want to be a leader, you have to first listen to what people have to say.
One other point, and then we'll move on. But there's a section there, he called it airborne diplomacy, and it had to do with the fact that
Sure.
Colin Allred, who is also a fellow freshman, but a Democrat from the district that used to be Pete Sessions' district, you again, on almost every issue, because I know you pretty well, and I'm starting to get to know him pretty well, probably disagree, but you were gracious towards each other, provided him a seat on the plane next to you, and it just, again, reminded me of what used to exist in the past. There would be times when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill would have a very robust debate or argument, but then after hours, they would be friends. And it seems to me that we need to cultivate more of that in Congress, so that even if you have a robust debate on the floor of the House, later on, if you want to get together at a party, they don't shun you or turn the other way and don't even say hello to you, because you, after all, are trying to make the United States a better place.
Sure, and I think it's recognizing that people are patriots and they care about their country, and they're making a sacrifice to serve in the U.S. Congress, and it's a privilege to be here. And you want to build, if you build the relationships and you reach out, people will ask you to help. And one thing that I've done is when there's a Democrat bill that I think is a good bill, I'll sign on to it, and I'm now having about one Democrat a week call into my office and say, hey, could you be the lead Republican on this common sense piece of legislation that I think that you're going to agree with and is a good idea? And, more often than not, it is a good idea, and it is something that I want to put my name on. And so I will sign up and support. And that builds, again, you're building the relationships, and you're building the and little deals beget big deals. And the other thing I'll say is, what I learned in the Marine Corps, at the basic school, where there was a class of 250 second lieutenants and everybody's the exact same rank. You're all second lieutenants. Very hard to boss around someone who's your own rank. And the motto of the basic school is ductus exemplo, leadership by example.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm trying to set the example of reaching across the aisle, of talking to people. And I've actually had people that have members of Congress have read that article in the Dallas Morning News and said, that makes me want to do more to be bipartisan too. I'm going to do more to build relationships across the aisle. And that isn't necessarily a relationship with Van Taylor. It's a relationship with other Republicans or other Republicans trying to work with other Democrats. And so I think but that's how you begin. You begin with, to mend there's a lot of mistrust in Congress, a lot of dysfunction, but it begins with a phone call, a text, shaking hands, a greeting, knowing how's their family. I mean, just being respectful and kind and thoughtful. You never go wrong with that.
Van Taylor with us. We'll take a break. We have a few more questions for him, and that will take place right after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, many members of the millennial generation think they're special. At least that is the conclusion of a recent study of college students. One newspaper report on the study put it this way: if you ask a college freshman today who the greatest generation is, they might respond by pointing in a mirror. The study of college students documented young people's unprecedented level of self-infatuation. Psychologist Gene Twenge found that over the last 4 decades of research on college freshmen, there has been a dramatic rise in self-confidence. For example, they describe themselves as above average in academic ability and in their personal lives. The problem is that there is a stark disconnect between their opinions of themselves and their actual ability. She's found that students suffer from what she calls ambition inflation. As their ambition increases, it reaches levels of unrealistic expectations. She has also found in another study that there has been a 30% increase towards narcissism in students since 1979. The changing culture is part of the reason for this dramatic change. She explains our culture used to encourage modesty and humility and not bragging about yourself. If someone did that in the past, we call that person stuck up or conceited. Today, the culture often rewards such attitudes and behavior. I would also argue that social media encourages and accentuates this trend. Students posting pictures of themselves on Facebook and Instagram, uploading videos on YouTube, and leaving numerous comments on Twitter receive positive feedback for such behavior. These technologies provide additional vehicles to feed their narcissism. These studies remind us that this generation needs guidance from pastors and parents so that they can apply biblical principles of success, humility, and self-image. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Representative Van Taylor with us for a few more minutes. And Van, if we can, talk about the disaster aid bill, not so much for the vote, but maybe explain the process, because I don't think people understand that oftentimes what happens is a bill, in this case we're talking about a $19 billion disaster relief bill, was put forward, I think, first of all, during the Memorial Day recess. And then later, of course, when it was brought up, you have your fellow Representative Chip Roy saying, wait a minute, I'm going to object to this. And, of course, there was all sorts of pushback. But I don't think people realize how often some of these votings, or some of these bills, if you will, and some of these funding initiatives are simply done by unanimous consent. And unless somebody is kind of the skunk in the party, in this case Chip Roy, that just flies through. And at a time when we have $22 trillion in debt, don't we deserve a little bit of discussion about some of these bills?
Yeah, this is really part of a bigger problem in Congress, and that is that they have a completely dysfunctional budgeting process. And so whereas most states, state of Texas, cities, counties, school districts, countries have single bill budgets, right? So Texas does their budgeting in a single bill. They've passed every budget on time since 1963. The last 3 budgets have been basically unanimous in the legislature. A couple people voted against it, but basically unanimous budgeting process. So you contrast that to Congress. So Congress did a single bill budget from the 20s until 1975. In 1976, they went to the Budget Control Act. And the Budget Control Act set up a 13 bill budget system. And then it started setting up a bunch of spending on autopilot. So a lot of different benefits are on autopilot. about 70% of the federal budget actually is on autopilot. So the discretionary spending is what they fight over, and that's what you appropriate. And that actually, since they put that system in place, in 43 budgets, they've only been able to get 4 of them done on time.
Wow.
In 21 Congresses, they've had 21 shutdowns.
Wow.
And you run up $22 trillion of debt because you have so much spending on autopilot. If you have 70% of your spending on autopilot, you're not really looking at it. I mean, it's just on autopilot, just kind of keeps going up and up and up. And no one really sits down and says, hey, what can we do to rein this in or see if there's fraud, waste, and abuse? And so it keeps getting worse. And there is no way to balance the budget with the current budgeting system. Current budgeting system has no way of doing it. And so the idea, and so there's incredibly little fiscal discipline. You watch bills all the time that go to the U.S. House that are spending, from $1 million to $19 billion that are not tied to a budget. It's not part of a total. Hey, what are we going to spend this year package? And so you just have a and literally, I would say the United States of America has the worst budgeting system in the world. I know of no other nation on earth that has a budgeting system as bad as ours. It's a totally non-functional budgeting system. And until you go back to the single bill budget, which worked. It's not like some magic or something like, who does that? The answer is everybody else.
Everybody else, except for
everybody
Congress.
else does it because it works, and they don't have shutdowns. They don't have the kind of deficit spending. They don't have, and a lot of people think, well, if you put a balanced budget amendment on, and that was actually the first thing I saw when I got here to Congress was a balanced budget amendment. Maybe that'll fix it, but even then. A balanced budget amendment, until you have a budgeting process that addresses all your spending, all $4.5 trillion, you're not going to have a balanced budget.
And it seems to me that in this particular case, a lot of people were saying, well, still, how could you vote against it? And well, I put at least 2 things on the table. Number one, there's pretty good evidence that I think about $29 billion of disaster relief money hasn't even been spent. So it wasn't like it was urgent and didn't have to be forced through at a moment. And back to my other point, when you're already $22 trillion in debt, that's the old line that if you're in a hole, stop digging. And that was one of the reasons why you and a number of other people said, we don't need to vote for this right now, and we certainly don't need to approve it. True?
Well, I think, look, there are definitely some pieces of that bill that were needed and appropriate, there is a role for the federal government to play in disaster recovery. But there was just a tremendous amount of waste, the level of spending, the other things that were added on that just kind of tore at your conscience and said this is just not the right thing to do. But going back to the original thought, when the Congress spends $19 billion, they should vote on it.
Right.
And that's just a very basic idea of governing. The members of Congress should have a say in it. And I'll point out, look, there were basically almost 100 Republicans that changed their vote between the version that left the House and the version that came back from the Senate. The Senate, quote unquote, improved it, at least in their minds, and in the minds of, there were about 150 Republicans that voted against it when it left the House. There were about 58 that voted against it when it came back from the Senate. So it allowed them to, say what they thought about that bill. And so they were basically, a bunch of Republicans, I wasn't one of them, but a bunch of Republicans say, hey, we think that you, the Senate, have improved this bill to the point that we're not going to vote for it. But again, it's really a process thing. It is incredibly upsetting. Basically, in Congress so far, in my 150 days, we've voted on 3 major spending bills. And if you can believe it, 2 of those 3 they tried to do through unanimous consent.
Yes.
You had the $33 billion spending bill that went through unanimous consent that ended the shutdown. That was a bit of a surprise. I don't think people saw that coming. But the disaster bill was designed. They knew exactly what they were doing.
Right.
Everybody was on a plane. I was literally in the air with Wi-Fi when I got the ping that, hey, we're voting tomorrow morning for the disaster bill. Chip Roy was still back here in Washington, and he went and objected, and 2 other members of Congress objected, and there was a vote, and I was glad there was a vote because it gave people a chance to weigh in on what they thought about a very substantial bill. Spending $19 billion is a big deal, and it deserves to have a vote, and it shouldn't just be shuffled along by unanimous consent where no one has a say.
Just before we let you go, you served in the military, and one of the things on vantaylor.house.gov is the announcement of appointments to the U.S. Service Academies. And we have some of the best and brightest going off to serve in the military, and I thought it was really powerful to have somebody who had served in the military in more than one occasion to actually speak to and endorse those individuals going off to those service academies.
Yeah, I will say it's a tremendous privilege to represent the 3rd Congressional District of Texas, and Collin County has so many really terrific individuals, and we have just a ridiculously terrific pool of young men and women who are willing to give of themselves and serve in the service academies. On average, a congressional district should have 20 total slots at all the service academies. I think we had 26 fresh going this summer to service academies. So the 3rd District of Texas, I think I told one other congressman, and he was so blown away. I've not told any of the others because they were just so completely astonished at how great our district is and how disproportionate number of young men and women we have going to all the military academies, going to the United States Military Academy at West Point, to going to the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and the Merchant Marine Academy. Great organizations. Really proud of those young individuals who've really distinguished themselves, gotten an appointment to the academy, and I'm very fortunate to be able to call them our own. And one thing I'll just share with you, a real joy of being a member of Congress is being able to call a young person and tell them that they've been admitted to a United States Military Academy, and that it's a life-changing event, right? They're going to go. It's going to really change where they're going. Not only where they're going to go to college, but where they're going to do the next couple of years of their life, and the opportunity to serve and lead, and they're going to go on. There are people that they do 30 years in the Marine Corps or 30 years in the Navy, and then they go on to go do other things. I happen to be one of those people, but they go on and they go and lead in other facets, whether it's in government or in business or in academia, and it's really exciting to have so many terrific young people willing to serve.
Again, record number of individuals, the best and the brightest out of the 3rd Congressional District. If you'd like to see the list, it's on your website as well, vantaylor.house.gov, and it's just fascinating to see that. And if nothing else, thank you, as we've always said before, for your service, and thank you for encouraging them as well. So look forward to the next opportunity with Representative Van Taylor.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, got some things to talk about, as you might imagine. A couple of things we really didn't get into yesterday with Nick Pitts, so we're going to do that first, and then we'll get into a couple of news items. Let me just mention a little bit later when we have our friend Gary Bauer with us, we will be talking about the economy. We'll talk about abortion, in particular, getting into the very powerful concurring opinion by Justice Clarence Thomas, and also tamping down the rumors that he is stepping down. He is not. And so, anyway, we've got lots to talk about today. We will do that right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me commend to you that first article that we did mention by, again, the Dallas Morning News, and in particular, the story about Van Taylor being bipartisan. The fact that you see it as a significant article, even a front page kind of article, says a lot about the fact that there isn't a whole lot of bipartisanship left in Congress. That needs to change, and these kinds of individuals that we've elected to office, some of them may bring about that change. I certainly hope so. So again, that article is available to you, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If you listen to the program, you know that on Tuesday, Nick Pitts is the host, and yesterday I had a chance to sit across from him. Next week he'll be hosting without me. But one of the things we were going to talk about is deep fakes. Now, that's kind of the new word of the week, maybe the new word of the month, and I thought I would explain it for just a minute. As some of you may know, I came back from Europe. I was over in Europe, and actually in Switzerland and Hungary. But right next door in Austria has been an ongoing debate and discussion about deep fakes. So this discussion in Europe has now made its way over here to the United States. And I'll explain why in just a minute. But you might say, what is a deep fake? It turns out that if you've ever maybe worked with Photoshop or Lightroom, and I've done a little bit of that, and you know how you can take a person's face and put it on somebody else's body, and you can eliminate something or put something in. What you can do with a picture, we can also do with a video. Now, the reality has been that has been rather difficult to do, because you really, if you're going to do it in a way that made it even credible, needed to have kind of cutting-edge video technology. Most of that's found in places like Hollywood and Burbank and Beverly Hills and things like that. And so that was the case. Jim Garrity, who we've talked about on this program before, did a commentary in which he said, you know, that kind of professional technology allowed film producers, to make it look like Forrest Gump was shaking hands with John F. Kennedy or having a conversation with Lyndon Johnson. But that technology, which used to be pretty much located in Hollywood, is now being more and more available to other individuals. And there are some tricks that even if you just have Photoshop and maybe Premiere or Final Cut, probably could do that. Which brings us to why this conversation has surfaced here in the United States, and that is when I was out of the country, nevertheless, I heard about this fake video that was produced of Nancy Pelosi and passed around social media. And because of that, there were people wondering, are we going to have a rash of deep fakes? Maybe. I don't see that it would be prevented by the technology. The technology makes it possible. And what could indeed happen, as you saw in the case of the Speaker of the House, is that you could create a video that would embarrass that person. And even more of concern to you and me is the fact that the targets might not just be politicians or celebrities. It could be you or me. I mean, somebody could create a video making it look like you've said something or done something you did not do. Now, so far, still, I've looked at some of these so-called fake videos. They look pretty fake. But, you know, and part of the reason for that is we have a level of sophistication. You know, just think of the number of videos you've watched over your lifetime. Think of the number of movies you've gone to. You know, we very quickly catch some kind of CGI mistake on one of these action films. So we're pretty sophisticated. We may not know what's wrong, but we know something's wrong, or it doesn't look right, or the mouth doesn't seem to match. So that is certainly the case. So that's one of those issues. But in my commentary coming out next week, I point out that Cameron Faulkner, who's written about this, actually says there are now researchers at Samsung's AI Center that have developed a method by which you could take a single photo and make a fairly convincing video. So the point I'm making is that even when you see a video, you got to exercise some level of discernment, because it used to be that I have to see it to believe it. You remember that? Seeing is believing? Well, not necessarily any longer. And so that's just an issue that I think is going to be something that we're going to have to pay attention to. And if you'd like to join us on this issue, 1-800-351-1212. It occurred to me, and I mentioned this in the video, and Jim Garrity had mentioned as well, that once we start having some kind of evidence that fake videos are being produced, that these are deep fakes, don't you see how this almost becomes an instantaneous excuse, or maybe even a justification or a defense, by saying, well, I know the video looks real, but the video is false, so don't believe what you see in the video. But anyway, I thought it was kind of interesting that deepfakes video, which has been kind of a debate, primarily in Austria, not exclusively, because I think there was a deepfakes video of Donald Trump that was used in like the Belgian elections, I believe. So there's a few of those that have happened. But most of the time, they have not been very convincing. I mean, even if, back to the point I made just a minute ago about Forrest Gump, have you ever watched the Forrest Gump movie? You kind of look at that and go, well, yeah, it's, I'll suspend belief. Doesn't quite look right, but it looks pretty close. But, with all sorts of color grading and things like that, it is quite possible that in the future, just because you saw it on a photo or just because you saw it in a video doesn't necessarily mean that it happened. And so that's the whole issue of deep fakes. And on June 12th, that's where I have a commentary coming out that you actually might want to actually read in its entirety. Speaking of commentaries, let me just mention my commentary today before we take a break. It's entitled, We Are Special. And it is, again, related to the conversations we had yesterday with the millennial generation, because as I point out, many in the millennial generation feel they're special. Matter of fact, one of the studies that was done put it this way. If you ask a college freshman today who the greatest generation is, that would be those born before the end of World War II, actually that were in World War II, they might respond by pointing to a mirror. And the psychologist Gene Twenge, who we've quoted many times here on the program, found that over the last 4 decades of research on college freshmen, there has been a dramatic rise in self-confidence, which I think is kind of interesting because oftentimes the most confident people I ever run into are high school seniors. Nobody's smarter than a high school senior. They think they learned it all. Sometimes the ones that have the least confidence are the college freshmen who all of a sudden get into a class and go, whoa, there's a lot more I need to learn than I thought I did. But nevertheless, they're finding that a lot of these college freshmen have a tremendous amount of self-confidence. And interestingly enough, when you ask them to actually evaluate themselves, almost all of them describe themselves as above average in academic ability and in their personal lives. So oftentimes there's a real disconnect between the opinions they have of themselves and their actual ability. And I've talked about this before, even before we have the millennial generation. Almost every American generation has done poorly on things like the math and science tests when compared to other students across the country and across the world. But interestingly enough, even though American students oftentimes have not done as well in math and science, the one place where they exceeded almost every other student in the world was in their self-confidence. So they didn't do well, but they felt like they did well. And so that's been a problem for some time, but here we are as well. And so anyway, back to Gene Twenge, just before I take a break here. She said, our culture used to encourage modesty and humility and not bragging about oneself. If you did that in the past, we might refer to that person as being stuck up or conceited or something like that. But today, sometimes the culture rewards people with such attitudes and behaviors. And so part of that has to do with the cultural situation with the millennial generation. But I would add to it something I'm going to have coming out in our next booklet, and that is the impact of social media. When you are posting pictures of yourself on Facebook and Instagram, you're uploading videos on YouTube, when you're leaving numerous comments on Twitter and receive positive feedback, that might already take a little bit of narcissism and self-confidence and even maybe drive it through the roof. So again, it brings us back to some of the biblical principles, and that is the need for us to really apply a biblical perspective on success, on self-esteem, on confidence, on humility, and to live lives that are worthy of emulation by the world. But nevertheless, I just wanted to mention that my commentary today is entitled We Are Special. It's all about the millennial generation, and if you would like to receive a copy of it, you can simply go to the website, pointofview.net, click on the button there, and you can print it out. But let me also mention that as you do that, there's a place where you can actually sign up. And if you sign up, you will receive my commentary Monday through Friday in your inbox, and on Saturday, Penn and Dexter's commentary. So let me encourage you to look for that, sign up, and receive it. We're going to take a break. I'll have a few more comments, and then Jake McEntire will be with us in the next hour. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention, in the next hour, we're going to be talking with Jake McEntire. Will be in studio with us as we talk about the film Run the Race. We'll talk about Tim Tebow, talk about the film, talk about the way in which you can actually benefit from that. And I just want to give you kind of the backstory about how this all developed. Fascinating story. And so he'll be in studio with us. Then the next hour, Kristen Eastlick will be with us. Eastlick will be talking about the Influence Watch website that I think you need to know about. about. It is an organization that has been put together by the Capital Research Center. We'll give you that perspective. And then we'll be talking with our good friend Gary Bauer about abortion, the economy, and a variety of other issues. And so hope you'll be with us all 3 hours. And if you are listen on a radio station that does not carry all 3 hours, of course, you can still go to pointofview.net and listen to it there as well. I mentioned my commentary today, but I didn't really come back and talk about the commentary yesterday. And since a very significant number of our listeners are in the state of Texas, I thought this is relevant. But wherever you're listening right now, this would certainly be appropriate because it's entitled Escaping Taxes. And it's interesting because over the years, I've written all sorts of commentaries about how people in high-tax states have been migrating to low-tax states. Whether it was people that used to move from North Dakota to South Dakota, people moving from California to Nevada, people moving from New York to a variety of places, including the state of Texas. And the argument used to be, well, that's just because people move around a lot or they want to move to the Sun Belt states. But the evidence is getting more and more abundant that even sometimes they will move from one state to the other state with the same climate. And the example I just used a minute ago was the one I used for many years. There is virtually no difference, having spoken in North Dakota and South Dakota, there's virtually no difference between North Dakota and South Dakota in terms of the economy, in terms of the climate, all sorts of things. But a massive number of people, until fairly recently, had been moving from North Dakota to South Dakota because North Dakota had a state income tax. South Dakota did not. Now, a lot more people have been going to North Dakota because of fracking and things like that, but it just illustrated the point that the tendency for some of these legislators and governors say, that's not, taxes aren't having an impact. It's just people are moving to Sunbelt states, and that always has happened. No, not necessarily. So in my commentary yesterday, I point out that when you look at the net of about $8.5 billion in adjusted gross income that left New Jersey and about $6.2 billion leaving Connecticut, you can see that it is also hurting dramatically some of those states that already are sort of high-tax states. Illinois, to use one more example, lost about $13.6 billion. But during that same period of time, Florida, which has no state income tax, gained $39 billion in adjusted gross income. And you might even see sometimes tax migration between high-tax states. That was something that I did not pick up until I read this piece in the Wall Street Journal, because it pointed out that income flows down the tax gradient. For example, New York lost a net $850 million in adjusted gross income to New Jersey and Connecticut. All three of those are high-tax states, but certainly the taxes in New Jersey and Connecticut a little bit lower than New York, so you see that there. At the same time, New Jersey gave up $335 million to Pennsylvania, and they're right next door to each other. So you can see that even sometimes when we're talking about high-tax states, sometimes they still move along what you might call that tax gradient. And, of course, it's easy to simply say that that was snowbird flight, but after all, I've been pointing out that people have been moving from the northeast of Florida for decades, but the examples oftentimes are more than just a migration to warmer climates, it's a migration to lower tax states. So, if nothing else, tax migration especially is affecting the affluent, because think about this. If you're a multi-millionaire and you live in New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Connecticut, California, you're going to be feeling that tax burden in so many different ways because we have, first of all, a graduated federal income tax, but in most of those states, you also have a graduated state income tax, and the taxation level is really almost unsustainable for the people that have that. And so when a millionaire, multimillionaire, or a flight of multimillionaires leave your state, you don't really have the ability to raise the taxes that much more, sometimes on the lower class or middle class. And so you start talking about having to cut public services or funding local governments or whatever it might be. Local governments then struggle because they can't fund everything, so they begin to raise property taxes. And, of course, here in the state of Texas, we've talked about the attempt to provide some property tax relief. And I think it just illustrates, again, the whole issue. So anyway, since I've been focusing some of my time and attention this morning and this afternoon on this subject of taxes and the viewpoint commentaries and on the millennial generation, I thought I would just mention that those are indeed available on our website, pointofview.net. And if you go to the viewpoint section, number 1, you can click on the button that says Read Now, or if you'd like to see the previous videos, go to the one that says See More Viewpoints. And when you do so, then you can go and actually scroll down and find my one from yesterday on escaping taxes, or the one Monday on intact families. And so all of those are available on the website. And as I pointed out before, they are also available to you if you would like to subscribe, because then it will be sent to your inbox, and that just gives you a way in which you can read some of the material that we're producing on the side. Many times I'll take a good interview that we've done on Point of View and summarize it on the commentary, or in other cases, material that I mentioned, I want to give it a little more specificity, maybe even a footnote, maybe even a reference to an article. And so if you don't get the Viewpoints commentary, let me commend that to you to sign up. And as we go to a break, let me also mention that we have a banner here that says Help Restore the Culture. And as you'll hear a little bit later in the day when we talk with our good friend Gary Bauer, the theme kind of this month in June is the theme of It's Morning in America. And as you'll hear as we talk with Gary Bauer, that was really the theme of Ronald Reagan in the Ronald Reagan years. And in particular, I would say that there are remarkable differences between, say, Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, both in style and substance. But there are some similarities, and that is, for our millennials, I had to remind them that when Ronald Reagan came into power, the economy was really in bad shape. There had been problems with inflation, all sorts of economic dislocation and the rest. By cutting taxes and lowering regulations, you see a booming economy. And at the same time, he also was able to put some very outstanding individuals on the Supreme Court, Antonin Scalia, one of those individuals. And so you saw the remarkable change that took place in the courts, including the Supreme Court. And if those don't sound familiar, well, you haven't been paying attention to what's been happening over the last almost 2 years. The change in the economy and the appointment of various constitutional conservatives on the Supreme Court seem to be quite a parallel between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. So that's one of the reasons we're going to feature a lot of the positive pieces of news that don't oftentimes get covered by the mainstream press. And as we do that, we hope that you appreciate the fact that we try to tell you stories that you don't hear anywhere else, try to tell you some of the positive things happening that you might not even know are taking place because the press has this constant drumbeat against the president. So if you appreciate what we do, I hope you'll also visit the website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says Help Restore the Culture, and your gift is something that we would greatly appreciate, and I hope some of you would not only think about a one-time gift, although we would certainly appreciate that before the end of our fiscal year, which ends June 30th, but maybe some of you might think about joining with us on the Truth Team. For as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, you can support this ministry. So again, that's all part of It's Morning in America. We'll talk more about that with Gary Bauer. When we come back, let's spend some time talking with Jake McEntire. Run the race. I think you'll enjoy it. We'll be right back.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here. We're going to spend some time over the next couple hours looking at a lot of different issues. In just a minute, we're going to talk about this film that you'll want to know about. So often on this program, we encourage you to find films that will encourage you and your family and really strengthen your faith. And we'll be talking about that with Jake McEntire, who's in studio with us today. And then in the next hour, I just might mention that we got Kristen Eastlick talking about the Influence Watch, an organization and a website that I think you're going to find really helpful. And then finishing off, we're going to be talking with our good friend Gary Bauer, served, of course, under Ronald Reagan as his domestic policy advisor and, of course, as the head of American Values, the End of Day Report. And in particular, we're going to talk about a couple of issues, one of which relates to the issue of abortion, because the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has written a concurring opinion that has been attacked, but I think he's been telling the truth about abortion and eugenics and a variety of other issues. We'll get into the economy. And, of course, even the theme in June is It's Morning in America. Well, that was the theme under Ronald Reagan, so I want to get some of his comments about that. So we have a lot to cover. Hope you'll stay with us for the entire 2 hours that we are be talking about these issues. But I want to feature a film. It's called Run the Race. It's really about two kind of desperate boys who were wanting to do all they could to sacrifice their today for a tomorrow. It will take you into football. It will take you into track. It will take you into broken homes. I think it's going to be something that you're going to want to get a copy of. We have information about it on our website. We have the trailer, and I want to encourage all of you to watch the trailer, then maybe click that share button, put it on your Facebook page. But first of all, I want to go to our native Texan here in the studio, Jake McEntire. He's an actor, writer, and producer. After 14 years, saw this vision that he had, this idea coming to fruition. And as an actor, he's appeared, for example, in the film Red Wing with Bill Paxton and on the TV series The League. And he is in studio with us today. So, Jake, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Kerby. Happy to be here.
Well, again, I mentioned that just maybe a little bit north of where we are right now, that's where you grew up, right?
That's right. Yeah, Whitewright, Texas, about an hour north of Dallas, a little small town with 1,600 people in it. So my mom still lives there.
Yeah. Well, and again, you, because of that, when you decided that you were going to write a film, you wrote what you knew about, and that is football and sports, small town. That's really kind of the theme of the film, but it also is kind of the theme of your life, wasn't it?
Oh, 100%. You know, I have 5 brothers, and so every Sunday we went to church. Every season we played whatever sport was going on, and we all kind of rallied, for one another, kind of a all for one, one for all mentality.
Yeah, well, again, that kind of thing illustrates exactly why we want to talk about this film. And but just before we do the film itself, I want to talk about this long slog, this long trail with a lot of detours and difficulties, because you had this vision, but it's been one of those things where people say, well, you were just an overnight success. Yeah, it took 14 years to be an overnight success, right? Tell the story if you would.
100%. So, after I graduated from Whitewright High School in 2001, I wanted to be an actor, so I went to University of North Texas and acted there. I also went to University of Texas in Arlington, did some acting there, and then I just kind of thought, well, am I going to get a degree in acting? Or, you can either act or you can't act, you know? And so I was driving past Dallas Baptist University, because I lived in Arlington, driving to Whitewright to see my family, and I was like, what is going on over there on that hill? So I did some research, and they were offering a biblical studies degree, and I talked to them, and they were saying, hey, if you want to come do this, if you want to integrate faith and film, make inspirational movies, we'll have all of your acting credits transfer over as communication electives, and you can get going. So 2004, I started at DBU and sat down next to who is now my best friend, Trey Brunson.
Oh, how about that?
Who was dad is Dr. Mac Brunson.
Oh, I know who he is.
And I just looked at him, and we became best friends. I said, Trey, I got an idea for a movie.
Yeah.
And I started freehand writing this thing in class in 2004.
And so, here we are, 2019.
You're exactly right. So then, you know, I was like, okay, you know, and 4 years later, I had all written down by hand, and Trey goes, okay, type it up. We got to get this script. You got to do this. And I was like, okay, and I kind of put it off. I was procrastinating a little bit. I'd do some stuff here on my own, but I'd procrastinate. Well, Trey ran the pastors' conference at Jacksonville, Florida, First Baptist Church of Jacksonville, Florida, every year. And in 2008, they had Jim Caviezel come in and speak. And Trey talked to Jim Caviezel, this is in 2008, about my movie, Run the Race. And Jim said, you tell him to write that thing. So then Trey calls me immediately and kind of lit a fire under me, and I started typing away. That was 2008. And then after I wrote it, I was like, okay, we wrote it. And it would just sat there.
Yeah.
And you're like, what do we do now?
No, what now? Yeah.
And so I'm an actor in Dallas, and so I was, you know, I wrote it again 2010, wrote it again 2011. And I was sitting down with my acting agent, Linda McAllister, and she goes, Jake, she said, you got a great script, but nobody's going to read this script because it's your first one, and, you know, you got to have some credibility. So make a little 6-minute concept trailer that would show people, what would show people what this thing is going to look like when you make it into a 2-hour film. I'm like, okay, so I didn't really know what I was doing, but in January of 2012, I had about 18 people sleeping on my mom's floor in White Wright, Texas, and for $5,000, we shot 72 hours, 3 days straight, and we made this little 6-minute concept trailer. And that was in 2012. And so then we're like, okay, we got a concept trailer to show people what it's going to look like. And then nothing. And you're just like, Lord, what do you want me to do? And there were times, you know, because at that moment I was teaching high school for 6 years and coaching, but I had left that job to do this completely full-time, going all in. I was very distraught. I was very discouraged. And in January of 2013, a year later, Trey Brunson gives me a call and says, Jake, I just showed your concept trailer to Tim and Robbie Tebow.
Yes.
And they want to meet you.
Yes.
Well, they want to have a phone call with you first. And I'm like, thank you. And how that took place is...
And Robbie's the older brother, Tim Tebow. And everybody would, I think, know Tim Tebow, and, you know.
It's crazy how God works this way, because you're exactly right. Robbie is the older brother.
Yeah.
And he's 6 years older.
Yeah.
But he is, you know, always worked with Tim, and they work well together. And so how it all came to be is Dr. Mac Brunson was at First Baptist Dallas. Well, then he went to First Baptist Jacksonville, Florida. Trey went with him after he graduated from DBU as an associate pastor. And that just happens to be the home church of a man named Tim Tebow and Robbie Tebow.
Yeah.
So Robbie calls Trey one day saying, hey, Tim, you'd like to preach. Let's set this up. And Trey said, you guys interested in inspirational films? And Robbie said, you know, we are. We just haven't really seen one that, you know, fits us.
Yeah.
And he said, check out this 6-minute concept trailer my friend Jake made in Texas. Read this script. Robbie read it and saw it and said, I want to get on the phone with this guy.
Isn't that great?
Summer of 2013, very first time I ever talked to Robbie, we talked for 2.5 hours. And one of the things he said, Jake, he said, Timmy and I look for vehicles that have the potential to go around the world and impact people for God. And we think Run the Race is one of those vehicles. He goes, you and Trey fly to L.A. and meet Timmy.
We're going to take a break because we have a lot more to tell you, not the least of which is just the incredible story of how this came about. But more importantly, if you say, well, I'd like to watch this, well, you can, because we have information about how you can get it in DVD, digital, Blu-ray. And so that is something that is the culmination of these 14 years of effort that came to fruition. And, of course, it ties into Tim Tebow and Robbie Tebow. So we're going to take a break and come back and talk a little bit more about the rest of the story, and then get into the story of the movie itself, and then what you can do with it. And I would encourage you to find out a little bit more, because this is something you may want to watch individually, might be something you might want to show in your Sunday school class or Bible fellowship. You might want to even use it as an outreach. So there are some ways in which you can use it. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, many members of the millennial generation think they're special. At least that is the conclusion of a recent study of college students. One newspaper report on the study put it this way: if you ask a college freshman today who the greatest generation is, they might respond by pointing in a mirror. The study of college students documented young people's unprecedented level of self-infatuation. Psychologist Gene Twenge found that over the last 4 decades of research on college freshmen, there has been a dramatic rise in self-confidence. For example, they describe themselves as above average in academic ability and in their personal lives. The problem is that there is a stark disconnect between their opinions of themselves and their actual ability. She's found that students suffer from what she calls ambition inflation. As their ambition increases, it reaches levels of unrealistic expectations. She has also found in another study that there has been a 30% increase towards narcissism in students since 1979. The changing culture is part of the reason for this dramatic change. She explains our culture used to encourage modesty and humility and not bragging about yourself. If someone did that in the past, we call that person stuck up or conceited. Today, the culture often rewards such attitudes and behavior. I would also argue that social media encourages and accentuates this trend. Students posting pictures of themselves on Facebook and Instagram, uploading videos on YouTube, and leaving numerous comments on Twitter receive positive feedback for such behavior. These technologies provide additional vehicles to feed their narcissism. These studies remind us that this generation needs guidance from pastors and parents so that they can apply biblical principles of success, humility, and self-image. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jake McEntire in studio with us today as we talk about this new film, Run the Race, and it is already available on DVD and digital. And in just a few minutes, we'll talk about the story of Zach and David and the broken family and just all sorts of themes that all run together. But we need to finish getting the film produced. And again, just having the name Tim Tebow on it probably helped a little bit, but it doesn't help that much because when you have to raise funds for a film and you're a beginning film producer and an actor, people are going to go, Jake, that's a nice idea, but I just don't think I'm going to invest. And so that was another big challenge, wasn't it?
Oh, 100%. So you have to build a team if you've never done this before. You have to build credibility and have people believe in you. And so fall of 2013, we go out and meet with Tim and Robbie. And essentially just Robbie says, Jake, tell Tim the story. And so I just, for about 5 minutes, just start getting after it, telling him what happens in the movie. This happens and that happens and that happens. Towards the end, Robbie is tearing up, their attorney's tearing up, and Tim has chills on his arm.
Oh, wow.
And he was leaned back in his chair, and I saw the hairs on his arm stand up, and then he kind of just leans in, kind of like, I see your passion, and I raise you all of mine.
Yeah.
And after it was done, he just said, God's doing something behind this. Let's figure it out. And we talked for probably another hour and a half just about random movies, Braveheart and stuff like that. But it didn't happen overnight because then in 2014, once we had Robbie's name attached as an executive producer, we had this company out of Chicago and Australia say, hey, sign an exclusive deal with us. We're going to fund you this Friday for $2 million. And And we did. We signed some paperwork with them. It was our obligation to put up the attorney fees and the banking fees for this wire to take place. For about 6-7 months, they lied to us every single Friday. And it came to a point where we were just collecting debt. We had about $50,000 in all these fees plus personal debt for me. And then finally they just vanished and disappeared.
Yeah, there you go.
And I had to sell my house in 2014 and move into an apartment. And because my wife Charity said, I believe God's telling us to continue to make this movie. We got to keep running our race. We got to keep going. And so then, about 5-6 months of just dead silence.
Yeah, this is so agonizing.
Until
yes,
I get a phone call from a guy named Dave Cooper up in New York. I've never met this guy to this day. And he was playing golf with a buddy who was playing golf with Robbie Tebow.
Mm-hmm.
And Robbie said, hey, check out this concept trailer. I'm working on this movie. That guy tells Dave Cooper in New York. Dave Cooper calls me, says, hey, can I show this concept trailer to a guy named Joe Pataglia up in New Jersey running a radio
and
station?
I do know him.
Joe, yeah.
And he's been on this program many times with us, and I've known him for decades. That's
Awesome.
how long we go back. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, he called me. He said, I saw this concept trailer, and I got this script. He goes, Jake, I haven't met you, but is it okay if I put this in front of a guy named Bill Reeves in Nashville? I said, Joe, put it in front of anybody you want to. I was like, put it in front of your grandma if she's going to help me make this movie. It doesn't matter to me. So he does.
I love Joe.
He's a great guy.
Yeah.
2 days later, I get a call from Bill Reeves in Nashville. And he said, I've seen this concept trailer from Joe. I want to meet your team. I want to meet you. I said, okay, when do you want to meet me? He goes, tomorrow. Come to Nashville. They were just happening to do NRB that year in Nashville.
Right.
So I
NRB.
Next day, flew,
Yeah.
met with Bill Reeves, and he runs a company called Working Title Agency up in Nashville, and they help market a lot of the faith-based films out there. So he knows the system. He knows how everything works. And he met me and another guy, and he was like, you know what? God's doing something behind this. He goes, I want your whole team to come to Florida. I got to meet this Tebow clan.
Yeah. So
spring of 15, we all go to Florida. Me, Trey Brunson, Robbie Tebow, Bill Reeves, Eric Dellenbach's there. And we just start working through it. And Tim was, he loves impacting people's hearts, but he didn't know if he was called to this movie. He knew that we were.
Yeah.
And so he was trying to figure out his place in it, and he was just kind of like, okay. And then he was transitioning from football to baseball at the same time.
Right.
And Bill Reeves got convicted and just said, all right, we're waiting on Timmy, but we don't. Well, guys, here's our team. He goes, are we trusting in one man to do this? Or are we trusting in Jesus Christ to make this movie? He goes, I feel called to this movie. I know you guys do too. He said, I'm going to fund it with or without anybody. We're going to find a way. Well, when Tim found out that, he said, okay, I'm in. I want another conversation. And so we met, and the team was built. So we had Bill Reeves, Tim Tebow, and then one of Robbie's good friends named Joe Kozakowski to come in and get this thing greenlit.
Well, if nothing else, I wanted you to hear that story. Some of you might say, well, that was a long way just to find out about how a film is produced, but I think there's a spiritual lesson there, and that is if God has called you to do something, sometimes those doors look closed, and you head down that hallway and you try one door and it's locked, and you go to another door and say, certainly that's going to open, and it's locked, and all of a sudden you finally say, well, is this ever going to happen? And finally you find that door and it opens up. And 14 years is a long time from the original concept to actually seeing it on the screen. And yet I think that's a lesson, Jake, that we can pass on to some of our listeners, even if they are never going to produce a film like you did.
I hope so. The biggest thing behind Run the Race is that I just tell people it took 14 years, but we really truly believe that God answered over 14,000 prayers before it actually took place, and he didn't have to do it.
Yeah.
He never promises you, I'll make your movie for you. But he promises you, I'm going to make you more like me and give you more of myself. And so just working through those prayers and just praying, hey, God, if you want me to do this, just tell me to do it. But also, if you want us to quit, please tell us to quit. We'd almost appreciate it. This is really hard. But if you want us to keep going, you've got to do this.
Yes.
And he did.
Well, again, the film is Run the Race, and we're going to spend some time talking about that and then even talking about how you can use it. But it really is the story of Zach, an all-state athlete, who honestly thought that by getting a scholarship on football, he'd be able to get out of that situation. And, of course, he has a brother by the name of David, and we'll get into some of that in just a minute. And you can relate to this as well, because how many young kids think, I'm going to get myself out of this situation if I can just get a scholarship. And I've seen some successes. I live in Allen, Texas, and we used to have a quarterback by the name of Kyler Murray. Maybe you've heard of him before. And he played pretty good high school ball, pretty good college ball. Looks like he's going to do well in the NFL. But for every one of those Kyler Murrays, there's a lot of David and Zachs that hope that they're going to get out of town and hope that they'll be able to get a scholarship. And this starts out with the hope that Zach's going to actually actually be able to use that scholarship to get them out. It doesn't quite turn out that way, does it?
No, it doesn't. So I don't want to exactly tell you what happens, but you'll see it in the concept trailer. Or just a regular trailer.
Yeah, we got the trailer available, so they get a pretty good sense.
Right on. So, he puts the weight on his shoulders. Their mom passes away when they're little, these two boys.
So sad.
And one brother, runs towards God, and one brother doesn't, and one brother is angry. And so he's putting it all on him to get him and his brother out of this town and give them a better life.
Yes.
And then when, stuff goes sour, it's soul-searching time.
Yeah.
And
in the midst of that, I mentioned the broken family, the father who is, not exactly the pillar of the community and things like that. So you've got a lot of themes that run together, don't you?
Yeah, the father's kind of an absentee father. What happened to their mom dying of cancer? He bolts, and he just kind of is touch and go with these boys, and they're living on their own in this old house that was hand-me-down from their grandma. They're working at the grocery store and just trying to hustle. And there's a lot of different themes in this movie, but what's really cool is that because I grew up in this little small town that, is very similar to what's in the movie, I was literally cherry-picking everything that I knew, good and bad,
that you'd seen.
I'd seen.
Yeah. And again, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, I want to talk a bit more about some of those themes that surface, but also want to talk about how you can use this film, because since it is now out, you can get it in DVD, you can get it in Blu-ray, you can get it in digital. When we come back from the break, I want maybe some of you that are in positions of leadership. You might be the pastor of your church. You might be a Sunday school teacher. You might be a Bible fellowship leader. This could be just a great impact film. And while it's great that we can invite people to War Room in the theaters, you can also invite people into your home or invite people into your church and Run the Race, and use that in a very effective evangelistic way and really get a conversation going. So I want you to know a little bit more about that. And as we go to the break, let me first of all encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net, or you can go directly to runtheracemovie.com. Once you go there, you'll see how you can get a copy of it if you would like to use it. It has information about the various participants, the actors, and the set. It also has a trailer. And one of the things I encourage so many of you to do is actually to watch the trailer and then take the time to maybe pass that on to other individuals. It's about 2 minutes long, and it gives you a little bit of a sense of what the movie is all about. And so if you would do us a favor, not only to watch the trailer, but then there's a arrow there that is kind of a share button, and you can use that to then pass that on to others. You can send it to your pastor or to somebody by email. You could post it on your Facebook page. It could be a Twitter tweet or something of that nature. So again, we have all sorts of information about the film on the website pointofview.net. And of course, we still have Jake McEntire in studio. So by the way, if you'd like to join our conversation today, maybe you've seen the film, maybe you have some questions, feel free, if you'd like, to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break and continue our conversation with Jake McEntire right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, spending some time with Jake McEntire in studio with us as we talk about the film Run the Race. And I do want to spend some time this hour talking about what you can do in your own sphere of influence. It could be in your home, it could be in a church, or how you could use this effectively. Of course, you may just want to watch it and enjoy it, but I certainly want you to see this as an opportunity for outreach. But first of all, let's just talk about some of the other themes that run through the film. First of all, this desire to get out of this small town, some of the problems. But I've seen some interviews you've done where you say this isn't necessarily a Christian film, but it has a faith component. Is that fair?
Oh, that's 100% fair. I mean, faith, family, and football is what you're dealing with in this movie, and that's what I knew. And so there's not anything over the top like Christianese or anything corny or hokey. We really tried our best.
Yeah, you really pulled back a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We wanted it to be raw and gritty and authentic, and so that kids and everyone could relate to it and just say, yeah, that's real.
One of the things I thought was kind of interesting, and you've talked about this with me off air, but let's mention it on air. You had some actors and actresses that have some notoriety that wanted to actually participate in the film. Tell us that story, if you might.
Oh, 100%. So Michael T. Williamson, who plays the coach in the movie, he also played Bubba in Forrest Gump. He's a famous actor.
Yeah.
He was wanting to take some time off. He had just did Fences with Denzel Washington, played his brother, and it was a very trying role. And he was like, I just need to rest a little bit. And well, his agent said, you need to read this. And then he read it, and he goes, I feel God telling me I need to be in that movie.
Yeah, that's something.
And the same thing with Frances Fisher. I had actually met her in 2012 on Red Wing with...
wasn't she in Titanic or something?
Oh, yeah, Titanic and Unforgiven.
Oh, right. Yeah,
Unforgiven as well.
Yeah.
And we were in this movie called Red Wing. It was actually in Whitewright, Texas, my hometown. Bill Paxton was in it. Luke Perry was in it. And she was playing mine and Luke Perry's mom. And I was telling her about this movie, and I emailed her the concept trailer later, and she wrote me an email back and just said, Jake, I like the heart of this story. She said, if you ever get funded, I'll show up for you. 4 years later, I haven't talked to her at all. 4 years later, I give her a call and say, Frances, we got funded. She goes, when do you want me to show up to Alabama?
Yeah.
And so pretty cool just how we felt like, and even the brothers Tanner Stein and Evan Hofer, who plays Zach and Dave in the movie, we just feel like God kind of cherry-picked them and just said, all right, I'm going to build this team, and here's who's going to play these roles.
Again, one of the things I always like to encourage people to do is to think about their sphere of influence. And since it has both football and track, this is just as natural for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, right? I mean, if you have an FCA chapter at your school or in your church, this is just a great opportunity because kids love sports, and it's a sports movie in the sense, but it also gets them back thinking about priorities and faith and those kinds of things, doesn't it?
It really is low-hanging fruit for Fellowship of Christian Athletes. It is, it's teed up for them, and so, but it's for everybody. It's for every youth pastor out there. If you have a bunch of kids that you are ministering, they need to see this movie.
Yeah.
And then we also have a Bible study curriculum.
That's what I wanted to get to next. Talk about that.
Yeah, so while we're making the movie, Trey Brunson was out there as an executive producer, but he was also writing this Bible study curriculum to go along with the movie. So when we finished it, it's amazing, actually. Lifeway, it's in every one of their stores, or you can get it online at lifeway.com or on Amazon, and just type in Run the Race Bible Study. But it's essentially a breakdown of what happens in the movie to the characters, what God's doing behind the scenes on their hearts, and it kind of outlines and gives you some stepping stones of how can you get closer to God, and what are you doing? Are you running towards Him, or are you running away?
Yeah. So again, this idea of running the race, I thought it's kind of interesting because it starts where you think it's going to be a football movie because that's all about Zach, and he's an all-state type of individual and very gifted. But then I don't think I'm giving anything away because I saw it in the trailer. He gets an injury. And so then David steps up to run track. So you have really, in a sense, all sorts of aspects of the sports metaphor. And if you think about that, how many times in the New Testament does the Apostle Paul use some kind of sports metaphor as well? Run the race, finish with excellence, the encumbrances and those kinds of things. So you really have that kind of theme that runs through that kind of be reinforced. But then how can people use this Bible study that you've actually put together?
Oh, yeah. So it's great. So you have the Blu-ray and the DVDs available right now in all Walmart stores. And if you get the Bible study curriculum that goes along with it on either Amazon or Lifeway.com, you've got yourself set up for a pretty good semester with anybody.
Yeah.
It could be your own family. It says a teen Bible study on it, but it's pretty in depth. It's pretty heavy. We're proud of it. Trey did an amazing job, and I honestly think it can encourage anybody. And so you watch the movie, then you go through the Bible study as a family, and hopefully it equips you and encourages you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if nothing else, I just want to say, summer, kids are sitting around, you want them to do something. They want to go to some movies, bring this one in, and that will make a difference in their life. And so for just a few minutes, if you don't mind, I'm going to have you share some of the stories because the film has been out and it has already had an impact. And so what are some of the things that you've heard as a result of people that have had a chance to see the film?
Well, the one thing that really kind of stood out for us is that within the very first week it was in the theaters, we had people emailing, texting, and putting up their own videos on Facebook just saying, hey, I've already seen the movie 4 times. And I'm like, in 7 days?
Yeah.
And it even touched somebody's heart so much out of Arizona that they called us and wanted to donate $50,000 just for us to take inner city kids and kids in churches to go see this movie. And so we did. And so we had people in Houston, we had Dallas, we had, going to Idaho, New York, Chicago, like all these different places. We were bringing kids to see the movie, and it's just really been changing their lives. And so I guess just for us, we continually get text messages and phone calls and Facebook messages with videos of kids saying this is their favorite movie.
Isn't that funny? And again, a lot of people probably don't know Jake McEntire, although I think you're fixing to change that, as they say in Texas. But they do know Tim Tebow, and the fact that Tim Tebow is behind it, that's really been helpful to you, hasn't it? Just in terms of getting people's attention, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Tim's a great guy, and he is probably one of the most authentic, real, genuine guys I've ever met in my entire life. But he's such a big guy, and his personality is the way it is with his charisma. He's a polarizing force, you know. And so
I know that.
He gets people's attention, but he does it in the right way, and he walks the walk, not only talks the talk.
Yeah. So what would you recommend if somebody wanted to have an outreach? Is there a way that you would want them maybe to show the film and then do the Bible study or do that with it? Or how would you recommend that? Because I think there are a lot of people saying, well, I never really even thought about using one of these DVDs in an outreach format. Do you have any experience or any suggestions on how they might do that?
Yeah, 100%. So if you go on Facebook, Run the Race Movie on Facebook.
I think we do have that link. Okay.
And you just message us and say, hey, I would like to show this movie to my church, and kind of like a little satellite church opportunity. We can send you a form that you can fill out. And we just did this actually in Whitewright, Texas at the Kings Trail Cowboy Church with those guys. I was there a couple weeks ago, and they rented out the satellite church stuff, and they watched the movie, and we were all there, and it was great.
Are you available for speaking? Because it seems to me that if they wanted to do some kind of big community outreach or something like that, to bring you in and talk about the film and the history and some of the things that people have heard on the air today.
Absolutely, yeah. Just go to Run the Race Movie Facebook page and just send a private message, and we'll answer it, and I'll be there.
Well, again, the film is entitled Run the Race, and again, it is a story, as I just mentioned a minute ago, 2 brothers sacrificing today for a better tomorrow. And the story is really, as we've talked about, Zach, an all-state athlete, thinking that, well, this football scholarship will get me out and get my brother out, and yet that devastating injury then causes his brother David to lace up his shoes and to see if he can do something in track. And that's kind of the interesting theme, because, Jake, we've been talking about how long it takes to make the film and how you went through all sorts of struggles to get there. Then as you watch the film, you realize the struggles that those 2 brothers, although fictional stories, nevertheless. And I think there's just a real lessons of perseverance, both in how the movie was made and even the lesson of perseverance even in the film itself.
Yeah, we wrote a movie called Run the Race, and then Robbie Tebow and I will joke, and it's almost like, then
Run the marathon.
God was like, well, okay, you did a good job, right? And I'm going to see if you believe it.
Yeah.
And then, so this is a long journey of getting it off the ground. It's been pretty sanctifying.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation for just a few more minutes with Jake McEntire. But if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more, we have a link to the website. You can go to pointofview.net or go to runtheracemovie.com. Have a trailer there. But I might also mention, we just mentioned the Facebook page. That's another link that you can find. And if you'd like to have Jake come and speak or get some of these other individuals to be involved, I think this would be a great idea. Might even think about identifying some Christian athletes in your community. Have them maybe share their testimony. Watch the film, or watch the film, share their testimony. There's a Bible study that goes with it. I just think it's kind of a turnkey operation. If you want to have some kind of outreach in your community, in your church, please take the time to find out a little bit more. So we'll take a break, come back, and make a few final comments. And then let me just mention as a program note, in the next hour we're going to be talking with Kristen Eastlick, who is the Senior Vice President with the Capital Research Center. We're going to be talking about this website, Influence Watch, which I think is going to be really important for you because they really have been doing an investigation of all sorts of nonprofits and foundations and donors and others trying to influence public policy. And you're going to need to know about that website and use that effectively. Then we have our good friend Gary Bauer, who served as the Chief Domestic Policy Advisor for Ronald Reagan, now head of American Values, talking about some of these very important issues in the news. Got a lot to cover. We'll do so right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back in a few more minutes, we have Jake McEntire in studio with us today as we talk about the film Run the Race. And one of the things I thought we might talk about for just a minute is I know there's some listeners out here that maybe have never been on a film set, don't even understand how this is done. I think we gave them a little bit more of a picture when you talked about how long it took over 14 years to get to the goal line, to use a football analogy, or get to the tape, since it also has track. But it really does take an enormous number of individuals. It takes a team. Bob Buford has said on his in his book, for example, Halftime, anything that I ever did of significance was done with a team. And so you put together a fairly significant team just to produce this film, didn't you?
Right. You know, I get a lot of credit, I guess, for creating it and kind of sticking with it. But in the 14-year journey, God was just adding people to our team, like a little baby mini church.
Yes.
In a way, He was like, "I'm gonna, you're gonna do something that's gonna glorify my name, but I'm gonna do it using my body. That's what I do." And so essentially, my wife Charity was on it. Charity McEntire for 14 years. My brother Mark McEntire helped make the concept trailer that got in the hands of Tim and Robbie Tebow and Trey Brunson and Bill Reeves. And next thing you know, we got a good director. So we got Chris Dowling, who directed Where Hope Grows, and this is a wonderful film that he did. And so he was a great director. Our producers, Darren Moorman, Ken Carpenter, and of course our investors, Joe Kozakowski, Tim Tebow, and Bill Reeves. But it really is. And even Kevin Draper. Kevin Draper was a producer.
That's Jimmy Draper's son.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So we really just had this huge group of guys that were, and ladies too, that were all felt really called to this. And so at the end of the day, everybody felt like, hey, we all ran our race together. And inevitably, God got the most glory and we got the most joy.
Yes. And let's, if we can, talk about somebody that might want to get into this. Every year in July, we talk about the Christian Writers Conference, and I really want to encourage people to go and be writers. But also, I want to encourage some young people out there listening right now. They might be listening because they're on summer break and they're having a chance to hear this, that say, I've always wanted to do a film. I've always wanted to be an actor. I've always wanted to be a producer. I would even just want to go on a set and learn a little bit more about what it's like. Talk about how you got involved and how others might be able to get involved, because we certainly need more Christian films and more Christians in films, right?
Right. And so, honestly, if you just get on forums online and just start looking, Googling, just film work in DFW, you're going to find somebody. This crazy industry is like a small town. It really is all who you know.
Yeah.
I had some connections because of my agent, Linda McAllister. But essentially, it is once they know you know how to do something, you start getting phone calls, and you just have to network yourself and just make a lot of friends. But if you wanted to jump in via me or get any questions, I'll answer the best I can. You can Facebook me at Jake McEntire, send me a message, and I'll try to help you in any way I can. But it really is just a lot of prayer and putting yourself in a position and just praying that God blesses you, and then He shows up.
Yeah. And again, we have a number of listeners in Georgia, for example. And of course, Georgia's in the news right now because they're saying because they passed this piece of legislation, the so-called heartbeat bill, some of the Hollywood producers say they're going to pull out of Georgia, which we'll see how many of those really do. But nevertheless, there are just opportunities wherever you may be located, and there are opportunities to use your craft. And I just think this is one of the things I want to encourage young people to see, that certainly if you are called to the ministry, as some of the people that you were with at DBU, that is wonderful. And I certainly go to Bible college, go to seminary. If you are called to be a missionary, please go, because we certainly need missionaries. But there is a sense in which really with this whole idea of filmmaking, it's a missionary activity as well. Now, sitting around the set, you're working with Christians, many of whom were the idea people behind that. But the people that are doing sound and lighting, the best boy, the gaffers, there are a lot of them that aren't Christians. But that's an opportunity too, isn't it?
100%. You're on set for 16-hour days at times. And, our shoot was 22 days. And so it's long hours, and you're just blowing and going. And, and you really just have to lead by example or try your best, because it's really tough. But like Chris Dowling is a Christian. He was our director. And, after the day wraps, he's out picking up trash and patting people on the back, and we're all loading equipment together, and just trying to stay positive and encourage one another. And if somebody's going through something in their own personal life, you share it, you pray over people, and you don't force it, but you just love on people, and it really is a ministry.
Yeah. Where do you think you're going? I remember when we first heard about the Kendrick brothers, they said, well, we're just going to do this film and see where it goes. And then there was this film, and then there was this film. And then now, of course, they're producing outstanding films there. Kevin Sorbo's been in the studio here with us, and a variety of others. I know this, in some respects, has been presented as a one-off, but where do you think the future is for Jake in the future? Any thoughts?
Lord willing, it's not a one-off. We were just, actually, all of us, our team was in Nashville this past weekend at the K-Love Awards.
Oh, how about that?
So Run the Race got nominated for a Most Impactful Film Award.
Good for you.
Unplanned won. Good for them. But it was really cool, just being back with Trey Brunson, Robbie Tebow, Bill and Joe, and Chris Dowling. And we were just kind of talking about what's next. And we're writing scripts, and we're developing stories. But Lord willing, there'll be another one. There'll be a lot more.
Well, again, if somebody wanted to work with you, again, you've made it very easy for people to contact you, and that is the case. But one last time, let's talk about what is available on the website, runtheracemovie.com. First of all, you can get it in DVD, Blu-ray, digital, whatever. Do a download. If there are individuals that say, well, I'd like to do more than just have a film, I'd like to maybe see that as spinning off into a Bible study, you have the Bible study curriculum. There's a trailer and some other resources, and if they would like some advice, they can contact you as well, can't they?
100%.
Yeah, and they can also have you come and speak. I think you'd be fun to have you explain the whole story before people watch the film. That would, if nothing else, be an encouragement just about if indeed you feel God has called you, keep trying and keep knocking on doors, and maybe eventually that will open up. And if that, nothing else, encourages some of you out there that are never going to produce a film, maybe there's something else God has called you to do, don't give up too early, because you could have given up a long time ago, couldn't you?
A long time ago, yeah. So, yeah, just contact me.
Lose your house, all the things oh, my goodness, the things you've had to go through.
Yeah, didn't lose my wife, though. That's good.
Yeah, that's good.
But, no, it definitely has been a journey, and we've done it all together, and yeah, looking forward to doing it again. But, yeah, if anybody wants to contact me, just Jake McEntire on Facebook, and I'll try to help them any way I can.
We have all the links that you need right there on the website, pointofview.net. Don't forget the name Jake McEntire. You're going to see more of that. I got a feeling we're going to see more films, too, so that'll be kind of fun. So, Jake, I know you're a busy guy, so thank you for giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
Kirby, I've loved it. Thank you so much.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, we got a couple things to cover. First of all, wanted you to know about a website called Influence Watch, which just really helps you understand the kind of people behind the scenes that are doing and making a difference, and sometimes influencing you that you need to know about. So we're going to be talking with Kristen Eastlick about that, and then when we come back after the interview with her, we're going to be talking with our good friend Gary Bauer. He, of course, produces the End of Day Report, and, of course, has an individual that worked in the Reagan administration, used to be the head of Family Research Council, and, of course, now is the head of American Values. And so we wanted you to know about some of those issues as well. If you'd like to know a little bit more about the things we are talking about today, all available at the website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, you'll see my Viewpoints commentary today, as well as we have some take action items, some video. Don't forget that this is a way in which you, if you have not already signed up, can visit with us to find out more about going to Israel with us in October. All of that at the website. And most importantly, we have a banner there that says Help Restore the Culture. This hour we've spent some time talking about being salt and light, being a light in a dark world, and using the medium of film to make a difference. And if you appreciate the medium that we use here of radio, we hope that you'll click on that button. And even if you can make just a one-time gift before the end of our fiscal year, which ends June 30th, we would greatly appreciate that. But I hope some of you might even think about the fact that you could join with us on the Truth Team, and that for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, you can join with us. And that's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break, though. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after these important messages.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time talking about a website, Influence Watch, and also an organization, the Capital Research Center, so you know a little bit more about how to make some sense out of individuals that either are profit, nonprofit organizations, or others that are influencing legislation and the rest. And then by the end of this hour, we're also going to be talking with our good friend Gary Bauer, served as the Chief Domestic Policy Advisor for Ronald Reagan, President of American Values. We're going to be talking about a number of issues, including one of the most insightful comments by the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas about the connection between abortion and eugenics, as well as a couple of other issues related to the economy, and even, of course, as we talk about the celebration of D-Day and also Tiananmen Square and a number of other things. We'll be talking about that with Gary Bauer. But first of all, let's spend some time talking with Kristen Eastlick, who is the Senior Vice President at Capital Research Center. Before that, she also worked at Berman & Company for 20 years, a public affairs and issue advocacy firm that engages in awareness campaigns about limited government. Holds a bachelor's degree from American University and joins us now by phone. Kristen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
One of the concerns that we have around here is that if you go to maybe sometimes a PTA meeting, you go to a city council meeting, you go to a legislative meeting, or you see various policies being enacted, you recognize that there are people behind the scenes that are actually advocating for those particular items or that particular bill or legislation. And as I understand it, a lot of what you do there at the Capital Research Center is really investigate some of those nonprofits, some of those foundations, and some of those activists. True?
That's exactly what we do. Capital Research Center was started in the mid-'80s, and it was designed to really look at all of the institutions of the left, whether it's the environmental groups or the labor movement, the foundations and the individual funders that are sort of allowing these issue campaigns to rise up and bubble up. I know everyone is very familiar with the young man David Hogg when he was fighting against gun laws in Florida. His talking points were prepared by Everytown for Gun Safety. This is not something they might look like grassroots organizations that erupt because of the passion of an issue, but often they're quite orchestrated by a large network of different organizations, starting from the funders, flowing through the organizations, flowing through the labor unions, and kind of creating what looks like, and what the media often reports, is a spontaneous effort of like minds coming together to enact change. It usually is not working that way.
Well, and there are certain people behind the scenes. This time last week, I was in Hungary, Budapest, Hungary. And I remember, I've been speaking there many years, but I remember a long time ago, I heard about a man by the name of George Soros. Well, of course, now all of us have heard of him, but I heard about him when he was just kind of not as well known in America. But if you look at the influence of, say, George Soros and the George Soros organizations, I think that's another illustration of individuals who are having a profound impact on public policy and in our daily lives, who are really sort of behind the scenes. And we wouldn't know a lot about them if it weren't for groups like the Capital Research Center.
Well, thank you. I like to think that we do occupy that role where we are the watchdog organization for the left. About a couple years ago, we wound up realizing that there was perhaps a better way that we could offer this information to the public, and that's why we launched Influence Watch. There have been a lot of organizations that have tried to do this, but many times there's a leading with the editorial version of what each organization does. What Influence Watch has tried very hard to do is be more like Wikipedia, that every sentence has a footnote, that every sentence is very dry and bland, so that when someone is reading, they can be more overwhelmed by all of the facts about this organization or that organization. For example, our entry on the Service Employee International Union, which is at the center of the Fight for 15 campaign. It's at the center. It did a lot of work to help enact Obamacare. It's at the center of a lot of the public interest fights that are out there. We have about 9,000 words about that organization, highlighting its financial malfeasance, highlighting some of the problems that they've had with their personnel, all of the scandals that have sort of riddled the organization's history. In a way that a reader, someone who maybe isn't as familiar with the public policy process or just hears about the organization, might take some points away that don't feel as politically charged. It's just a lot of facts and data that kind of overwhelm, we hope, the reader and make them see the organization differently.
I might just mention, too, that we have a link to influencewatch.org, but also one of the things you feature right now is about the SEIU, America's most powerful labor union. There's a video there that people can watch. So in addition to reading about these different, about 6,000 different public policy influencers, you also have a video that people can watch. And that's just another service that you provide so that people can take that material, maybe even use it to educate others in their sphere of influence.
Absolutely. That's something that we do have a few videos on Influence Watch, but we also have that on our main capitalresearch.org website, where every week or so we'll come out with a 2 or 3 minute educational video that takes a look at an organization or a public policy issue and give it to the public in a way that it's going to be a little easier to get through than reading lines and lines of text. You'll get to see a graphic description of what, say, socialism has done in Venezuela, or who the Democratic Socialists of America are. And it maybe makes it a little easier to share it with friends, especially some of the millennials out there.
And I might just mention that when you have about 6,000 different entries, that might seem overwhelming, but there's a place where you can browse by people, nonprofits, for-profits, labor unions, government agencies, various movements, political parties, and the like. So it is very user-friendly. And if you find yourself in some situation where you hear about this organization, maybe you've been providing testimony before a city council, or maybe you saw a news report of a particular organization that was influential at your state capitol, you can type in that name and begin to find out some more information. Or if you're not quite sure of the name, you can browse by the category and hopefully find it there. So let me take a break. Kristen, when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about how people can use this and some of the key organizations that you have certainly highlighted. Out of 6,000, I'm sure there are a few that you see showing up, and I think we've already talked about two that show up, and that is SEIU, George Soros, or just a couple of individuals and organizations that deserve some prominence. But we'll come back and spend a little more time talking about that. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to find that website, it's very easy. It's just influencewatch.org, but we also have a link on our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break, and Kristen Eastlick will be with us. She is the Senior Vice President at the Capital Research Center, and this is a resource that you need to know about. It's one that I would hope you would want to know about, so that when you find yourself in some of these discussions, some of these battles over public policy, you know exactly what you're dealing with and who some of these particular influential people are. So we'll talk more about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, many members of the millennial generation think they're special. At least that is the conclusion of a recent study of college students. One newspaper report on the study put it this way: if you ask a college freshman today who the greatest generation is, they might respond by pointing in a mirror. The study of college students documented young people's unprecedented level of self-infatuation. Psychologist Gene Twenge found that over the last 4 decades of research on college freshmen, there has been a dramatic rise in self-confidence. For example, they describe themselves as above average in academic ability and in their personal lives. The problem is that there is a stark disconnect between their opinions of themselves and their actual ability. She's found that students suffer from what she calls ambition inflation. As their ambition increases, it reaches levels of unrealistic expectations. She has also found in another study that there has been a 30% increase towards narcissism in students since 1979. The changing culture is part of the reason for this dramatic change. She explains our culture used to encourage modesty and humility and not bragging about yourself. If someone did that in the past, we call that person stuck up or conceited. Today, the culture often rewards such attitudes and behavior. I would also argue that social media encourages and accentuates this trend. Students posting pictures of themselves on Facebook and Instagram, uploading videos on YouTube, and leaving numerous comments on Twitter receive positive feedback for such behavior. These technologies provide additional vehicles to feed their narcissism. These studies remind us that this generation needs guidance from pastors and parents so that they can apply biblical principles of success, humility, and self-image. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Kristen Eastlick, who is the Senior Vice President at the Capital Research Center. And again, we have a link that I would encourage you to follow, influencewatch.org. I mentioned about 6,000 public policy influencers. Talk about some of those that you find most significant.
Oh, well, when we look at some of the debates that are going on today, let's take the Green New Deal, which is an incredibly socialist policy that has been introduced. And you can take for what it's worth the idea that the first version of that we saw that really was about eliminating air travel and really reducing our energy footprint in a way that is not realistic at all. There were a lot of allegations that that was not the real version. Well, when you look at some of the groups that talk about this, you find out that no, it really is the real version. And what we have is we've started building out this full network. If you look at Green New Deal Coalition or even the Green New Deal, we've got 2 separate profiles of them, and you can just see all of the different groups that are supporting this, and you can begin to see names that you recognize. One of the famous ones, because the children of this group were motivated by this group, the Sunrise Movement, went and marched on Senator Dianne Feinstein's office and did a sit-in, to which I think she handled better than a lot of legislators did. But you can see the reason that they did a sit-in was because one of the founders, a gentleman named Evan Weber, came from the Occupy Wall Street movement. So he, using the stunt, mobilization techniques that campaign sort of engendered, he sort of tipped that onto the Sunrise Movement, and that's an organization that you can follow. There's the movement, there's the education fund. You can see some of the 990s and find where the foundation funding is coming from. So we're constantly updating these profiles and the information, both with information we get from the IRS as well as our own research. And anytime these organizations show up in the press, we'll find new nuggets to put into our profiles. So it's constantly refreshed and it's constantly updated, which is something that Google likes a lot when it comes to pulling our entry very high in the search results. That's one of the nice things that we found with Influence Watch is that our profiles get read because they're showing up increasingly on the front page of searches when you look for the names. Another group that was very active this last year was Demand Justice, and that's one of the groups that was strongly opposing Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination. Well, because we were starting to follow this group just as the end of the Supreme Court term was happening, we wound up posting our Demand Justice profile at Influence Watch. I think it was the day before Justice Kennedy announced his retirement. So because people started then looking for Demand Justice, our profile on them was consistently outranking their own website when you would type the name in on Google. So that was great. We had fun with that for a while. It's because Google is always changing. It's not the same anymore, but we still rank very high, and that way people can sort of see, Brian Fallon, who's the leader, he's a political operative. He's a former Hillary Clinton staffer, and you can kind of see all of the networks that of groups that have been involved with that campaign.
I might just mention, too, that if you are near a computer right now, you could go to influencewatch.org, and, for example, you can type in Green New Deal, and you'll see, first of all, the nonprofit Green New Deal. If you click on that, they're just pages of all the links to all the various organizations, or you can find Movement Green New Deal and follow the movement, or as you mentioned just a minute ago, you can click on type in Demand Justice, and again, that shows you the nonprofit and shows those links, the media campaign, the campaign activism, the funding, and all the rest. And that's really important because one of the things we find, Kristen, is a lot of people just think that these are all, as you mentioned in the last segment, these sort of spontaneous grassroots movements, and they're not. These are interconnected groups which have a fairly significant amount of funding that oftentimes represent themselves as, just concerned citizens, but they're part of organizations, they're part of political parties, they're part of nonprofits or movements or whatever that have been in existence for some time that unless you went to maybe Influence Watch, you wouldn't realize how they're all connected to one another.
One thing about that Demand Justice group that I think is worth mentioning is that it doesn't even really have an address. It's very little more than a website. Wow. And the way that they have done that is because it is actually a project of an entirely different nonprofit. And that nonprofit is run by a public affairs firm. So there is a firm called Arabella Advisors that runs 4 different nonprofits, and each of those nonprofits then runs organization, project, all of these different groups that are living side by side, basically in their offices. So you might have a letter of 20 different signers, and they're all coming from the same place.
That's just incredible. So let's, if we can, talk about how people can use this. Again, we have the link to influencewatch.org. People can find that. I think some people think, well, don't I have to pay to get to this or anything like that? It's just free, and it's a great opportunity. And talk about how we can use that, because we have, Kristen, a lot of activists that listen to this program, and they may be testifying in front of a city council. They may even be going to their state capitol and testifying, or they may be just trying to figure out who is behind this issue of sustainability, Green New Deal, who's behind Medicare for All, whatever it might be. You give the tremendous amount of information so that you can kind of figure out who's behind some of these movements and what they're actually trying to achieve.
So just when you go to Influence Watch, you'll first be able to see some of the organizations that have been most recently updated, or the profiles. So you'll see sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's a group. So that's that's just probably what happened that afternoon, whatever one of my team members was in it making the adjustments. But if you know that Everytown for Gun Safety has just testified or will be testifying in your state legislature next week, type in Everytown, and if you pull that up, you'll see, or obviously you can put Everytown for Gun Safety, but if you're not 100% sure of the name, you can just type the first few words or the first couple of words and see what it pulls up. And not only that search itself is kind of interesting because first it absolutely brings up the organizations you're looking for, but then you'll also see some people names or other organization names, and what you'll find out is that in the body of those profiles is the reference to Everytown for Gun Safety, or is the reference to the organization that you were looking for. So sometimes you can see people who are involved without even clicking on any of the sites. You'll just see, oh, that's Brian Fallon. He was involved with Demand Justice because we've typed in Demand Justice. His profile might pop up in your search results. So you can start then. It's kind of going down a rabbit hole, right? Because you begin to look at one, and then you start reading more, and you realize, oh, I didn't realize that person did that, and you'll click on that entry. There are a lot of hyperlinks throughout the profiles. There are footnotes in every profile, so you should be able to click on the small number at the end, much like you do with Wikipedia, and look and read that footnote if you're thinking, ooh, I want to read that Washington Post article where this was quoted or this was stated. And you can easily find that. If it's an organization that has an employer ID number, you can scroll down to the bottom and we have the populated tax filings that this organization has submitted to the IRS.
And again,
you can immediately log.
And you read some of these news articles, and they'll say the nonpartisan nonprofit group,
Right.
and then you'll go and type it into Influence Watch and go, it doesn't look very nonpartisan to me.
Not nonpartisan at all.
Yeah, so just some great material. And I just wanted to educate our people. We have a lot of activists out there, and they say, well, who are behind some of the movements?
Yeah.
Well, the good news is you can go to influencewatch.org and you can find that. And, of course, this is all done by our friends at the Capital Research Center. And, Kristen, I appreciate you giving us some time today to educate our listeners. We'll do it again.
That would be great. Thank you so much. And please send us tips if you find them. Go on the website. There's a place to send in tips or additional profile requests or information. So use that as well.
Well, thank you so very much.
Thank
We're
you.
going to take a break, and Gary Bauer is going to be with us in just a minute. And, of course, he's a good friend. We're going to talk about a couple of really key issues, not the least of which is we've talked about this idea of it's morning in America. He'll recognize that theme because that was a theme of Ronald Reagan, and so he'll be joining us to talk about this for a few minutes, and I hope that you, as we go into that issue, will pay attention because we have a lot to cover, and a lot of what we'll be talking about is found in his end-of-day report, so if you haven't subscribed to that, we'll talk about that when we come back from the break. All of this that we are talking about today is available at our website, pointofview.net. And as you go to that website, you might click on the button there that says donate or join the team. Either way is a way you can support this ministry, and that helps us continue to bring these broadcasts to you. So we're trying to educate you and maybe pull back the curtain so you understand some of the players that are influencing your life. Let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
We now have a chance to hear from our good friend Gary Bauer, of course served as the Chief Domestic Policy Advisor under Ronald Reagan, President of American Values, and always loved to have him on, but especially felt that it was necessary since it seems like almost every day lately I've been reading from his end-of-day report, and of course we're going to get into a couple of those, in particular, of course, the very significant concurring opinion by Justice Clarence Thomas on the whole connection between abortion and eugenics. We'll get into a variety of other topics. And as we have always done, we have posted yesterday's end-of-day report. In case you are not subscribing to it, I would encourage you to do so. Lots of times people say, where do you get these ideas for the things you talk about or the things you write about? Well, a lot of them come from the end-of-day report. So again, Gary Bauer, I owe you a debt of gratitude for the good work that you do there at American Values.
Well, how nice of you, Kirby, and I appreciate you reading some of those items in the end of day over the air so that more people can hear about them. But and it's always a pleasure to come on with you in person and be able to talk about some of these issues.
Well, just before we get into some of those, I might just mention that the theme we have for June is It's a Morning in America. Now, you'll understand why we use that one in part, having worked under Ronald Reagan, because although I'll be the first to admit that there are striking differences between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump in terms of style and substance, even yesterday when we had our Millennial Roundtable, some of these young kids, they don't recognize what it was like in 1980 and 1981 when Ronald Reagan came in, how bad the economy was and all the rest, and how by, again, deregulation and tax cuts had the economy booming. That sounds familiar. And then also began to put various people in positions of power, and especially in the federal judiciary, like Justice Antonin Scalia. That sounds familiar. Mm-hmm. So even though there's some real differences, and I even noticed Gary Bauer saying that the other day, you know, we don't have a Ronald Reagan, but we do have somebody who was willing to make the hard decisions to save our economy and to really deal with some of those issues. So we thought it would be good to talk about some of the positives, and there is some similarity, don't you think, if we look back over the 1980s to what's been happening today?
Oh, I think there's a tremendous similarity. But by the way, even the way some of the leftists in Europe react to Donald Trump, people forget that that's exactly the way they reacted to Ronald Reagan. Reagan was subjected to horrific demonstrations in Europe because a lot of European leftists didn't like the fact that he was confronting the Soviet Union and had announced that the end of the Cold War was going to be very simple. They lose and we win. And that made the left go crazy when they heard things like that. You know, the other thing, Kirby, is I certainly agree with you. You know, temperament and in many other ways, President Trump is a lot different than President Reagan. And I occasionally hear some conservatives and quite frankly, some never-Trumpers bemoaning the fact that Donald Trump is not more like Ronald Reagan in temperament. And my response to that is, it's not the 1980s. I mean, I think Ronald Reagan was the great guy for the 1980s. I do not believe a conservative candidate that has the demeanor of a Ronald Reagan would win election today, because the left is crazier today, meaner today. And our country is, I think, more divided on fundamental matters today than it was when I proudly served Ronald Reagan for 8 years.
A couple hours ago, I was interviewing a member of Congress, and they did a story about him about being bipartisan. I said, just the fact that you had to have a story on the front page of the Dallas Morning News about being bipartisan, and I used the example that even after Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan would disagree, they would get together socially, and that just doesn't seem to be happening very much anymore. So it's just a good illustration that it's not the same world that Ronald Reagan lived in 1980. But let me just, in the interest of time, move on to one of those issues. I have a commentary coming out next week called Abortion and Eugenics, and quite frankly, a good portion of it comes from your end-of-day report, the rest from Star Parker, because Justice Clarence Thomas, 20-page concurring opinion on this law out of Indiana, reminds us that when we talk about abortion for reasons of race, sex, or disability, that's not hypothetical, but actually fits very well with the American eugenics movement and the ideas of Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger. And you just got to love Clarence Thomas. You and I both remember the battle that you were involved with and he was involved with just trying to get his confirmation. But he's controversial right now because he's speaking the truth about the connection between abortion and eugenics, right?
Well, he exactly. That is exactly right. And I will always love reading Clarence Thomas when he's in the majority opinion, particularly. But even when he's dissenting on a case, he gets right to the core of the matter. It's none of this beating around the bush. He goes right to what Americans need to think about in a particular Supreme Court dispute that has developed. And a week or so ago, when he wrote this opinion saying that the court, which had just dodged an abortion issue, quite frankly, that the court was going to have to deal with the abortion issue sooner or later, and particularly its connection to the whole eugenics movement, because things were moving so rapidly that if they didn't deal with it soon, we were going to end up putting the stamp of approval on the eugenics movement, something that I think most reasonable men and women of a good heart and soul have rejected over the decades. I mean, if you look at history, the biggest proponent of eugenics ended up being Nazi Germany, where the handicapped were killed or put away in camps, and all of the rest of the horror that went along with that. And yet we see that same philosophy all too often in the pro-abortion movement. And I was so proud of Justice Clarence Thomas that he called that out and drew people's attention to it. And I believe that opinion, that dissenting opinion he wrote, will be read many, many times long after he's gone. And I think will end up having a profound impact on American jurisprudence.
One of the things that we posted today was your article from yesterday, in which there were some that suggested that maybe he was going to retire. And I loved his reaction. I don't know where they come up with these ideas, but nevertheless, I thought it would be good for people to already have a chance to see that particular piece that you've posted there, because indeed, that is one of the reasons why I always appreciate reading your end of day report. And you've even posted an article today about that appeared in the Washington Examiner. So those are just some reasons why I hope that every listener here take the time to subscribe to your end of day report so they know a little bit more about what's going on and don't believe all the fake news out there.
Well, thanks, Kirby. There's been some reports, as you just alluded to, that Clarence Thomas might retire. There have been some people saying he should retire because time marches for doesn't stop for anybody. And the thought is, well, this would be a great chance for Donald Trump to replace a Clarence Thomas. And I want to say, as good as President Trump is in picking judicial nominees, I believe Clarence Thomas is irreplaceable. For a black man to have the views that he does and be proud of those views and to be sitting on the Supreme Court and making the case on these issues, I think is so powerful and has such a symbolic import to it that I doubt very seriously whether Donald Trump would be able to find somebody in the United States that is as powerful in making these arguments and to be able to do it from the standpoint of a minority American who knows what the effect of abortion has been on the minority communities.
I would love to see Donald Trump replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, by the way, had a real problem with the fact that he used the word mother. And just the other day, I talked about the fact that NPR has a style guide which now says you can't say that a woman who has an abortion is a mother because she's not a mother, really? And you can't say that it's a baby unless it's born. So some of these ideas are so bizarre, and it's just, again, one of the realities of the kind of world that we find ourselves in. But let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about a couple other issues real quickly. You've talked about this whole idea of immigration and tariffs and those kinds of issues. And, of course, as we talk about the celebration of the 75th anniversary of D-Day, but also, as we'll talk about tomorrow, Tiananmen Square and a variety of others, we can recognize the very important issues at stake around the world and even in our own country. So we'll take a break and continue our conversation for a few more minutes with our good friend Gary Bauer right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation with Gary Bauer for a few more minutes. Again, individual that is president of American Values. We have a link to Our American Values, which is a great resource for you. And again, we have our most recent end-of-day report, so you can read that and see that this would certainly be something you'd want to subscribe to. And let me again encourage you, if you aren't supporting American Values, I do, and I certainly encourage you do as well because of the great work that they do. And I'd love to talk about some of the threats we face, and one of those is China. You know, you think of when you were the chief domestic policy advisor, Ronald Reagan recognized with a clear vision the threat of the Soviet Union. He had, at least as some assets, Margaret Thatcher and Pope John Paul II. I'd hate to say it, but I'm not sure that the current and outgoing prime minister in England or the Pope have the same understanding of the threat of China But fortunately, the president does and recognizes that you have to sometimes make some hard decisions given the fact that China has predatory economic policies. It's threatening us in that area. And, of course, even as we come to this anniversary of Tiananmen Square, it prevents anyone from even knowing that it took place or even talking about this. It is one of the most brutal regimes on the planet, apart from, of course, North Korea. And I think Donald Trump understands that. And I'm sad to say there are a lot of apologists on both sides of the aisle that don't seem to understand that.
Well, the key, that's a great analysis, Kirby. And the key point there that you just made at the end, that there are people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, that either don't understand it or are in denial about it or, quite frankly, don't care to think about what the threat is from China. Back in the 80s, during the Reagan years and then after the Reagan years, every year or so, there was a vote in the United States Congress to grant China most favored nation trading status. And that vote was necessary because China was not part of the G7 or whatever the economic group was. And very early on, when I was then president of the Family Research Council, I put our weight at FRC toward opposing, defeating most favored nation status for China. And there were a lot of other people, including, I'm sad to say, former President George W. Bush, who was very much in favor of most favored nation status for China. And the argument was that trade with China would end up changing China. It would make them more democratic. There would be more freedom. And Kirby, I think the evidence is overwhelming that trade with China has not changed China. It's changed the United States.
Yes.
So I've noticed that when the Chinese come here to negotiate with the White House on the trade issue, the Chinese delegation first flies into New York, and they meet with the American business community and with Wall Street leaders in New York before they come to Washington to negotiate with the president. Because sadly, part of that American business community has become a highly effective lobby for the demands of the Chinese government.
Yeah. So again, when we have tariffs with China, I can understand that, and I recognize that it's done some harm. And we did a while back, a couple of weeks ago, a whole program just on China and the economic effects. But that's with tariffs with China. But you also more recently have written about the fact that the president wants to have graduated tariffs on products from Mexico, because Mexico has been allowing itself to be a conduit for illegal immigration. And I recognize the controversy of all of this, but at the same time, nothing's going to change if we keep doing the same thing we've always been doing in the past.
Well, I think that's exactly right. Now, look, I think it would be useful for the president perhaps to make some remarks from the Oval Office to remind people why he felt it was necessary to take this action. But what's going on at the border now is completely unacceptable. The figures that will be out, I believe, officially tomorrow is going to show that there were 144,000 arrests of people crossing the border in the last month. And, of course, when you say they were arrested or they were detained, our law, which the Congress refuses to change, requires that most of those people be released after they're detained after 20 days, and then they're asked to appear at a court hearing to determine whether they are a legitimate claimant for asylum here in the United States. And right now, 90% of those people never show up for that hearing.
Yes.
So we are literally transforming the country. Massive numbers of people coming in, most of whom will not be able to get along without financial assistance, various welfare programs, the impact on schools, on hospitals, on the local communities, the gang problem, the drug problem. the president sometimes, Kirby, seems to me to be the only guy in Washington that is actually fighting to do something about this. He's dealing with a hostile Democratic Party, and he's dealing with a lot of people in his own party that seem to be just sleepwalking through the whole crisis.
So I think we should pray for the president, although I understand that up there at McLean Bible Church, David Platt got himself in trouble just for praying for the president. It maybe shows you the kind of world that we live in today. Even praying for the president can get you in trouble, right?
Yeah, I look, a lot of people liked Barack Obama. I thought he was a failed president in many of the things he did. But when he went to a church and a pastor offered to pray over him or for him, it wouldn't have crossed my mind that was something inappropriate to do. But apparently that pastor at McLean Bible Church got some pushback from some of the more liberal members of his congregation. Liberal or conservative, if you're a Christian and don't think it's appropriate to pray for our leaders, you might want to take a moment and open your Bible and do a little bit more reading.
Yeah, 1 Timothy 2, for sure. Gary, just before we go, let's talk about what's available there at American Values. I promote you even when you're not on the air, but I wanted to get you on for just a few minutes just to talk about a few of the end-of-day reports. But again, this is a way in which people can support your ministry and also get this end-of-day report in their inbox every single day. But how can that take place?
They can just go to ouramericanvalues.org and sign up there, or you can follow me on Twitter, just Gary Bauer at Twitter. We also have a lot of other resources, but if you start getting that end-of-day report, you'll find out about those other resources and ways that you can become involved.
Well, again, tomorrow we're going to be talking about everything from Israel to China, but you wanted to spend a little bit of time today with Gary Bauer just talking about some of those resources that are available. We've posted an example of the end-of-day report from yesterday, and if you sign up, you'll probably even be able to receive them on a regular basis. So, Gary, thank you for the good work that you do. I appreciate you being up there in Washington, D.C., and each day we try in one way or another to point people to some of the great material that you make available, and so thank you for making my job a little bit easier because of the research you do.
Thank you, Kirby. I'm proud to be on the same team with you.
Going to take a break, and let me just mention tomorrow, David Rubin will be talking about Israel. We'll be talking about Gordon Chang, who's actually going to be in studio. We're going to be talking about China. And then don't forget, on a Friday, we'll have Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter, and that is our weekend edition. So if you found yourself saying you haven't covered all the issues, well, we're going to try to do a little better job of covering some more of those tomorrow. And, of course, we will be covering a lot of those on Friday. I know Kelly Shackelford wants to get into that whole issue of whether or not to pray for the president. That one seemed to have really gotten him. So we'll be hearing from him and about some of the religious liberty issues on Friday. But again, if you would like to know more about some of the things we've talked about today, they're all available at our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. See you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.